On our previous video about the Sino-Korean numbers, we were able to learn and memorize numbers 1 to 10. And on this video, which is the part 2 of the first one, we'll be forming numbers higher than 10. Let's start. This is just a quick review of the numbers discussed on the first video. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And this is equivalent to numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is easy to remember because this is just an increment of 1. What I mean is that number 2 is just 1 unit away from number 1. Number 3 is also 1 unit away from number 2. So the difference of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is just 1 unit from each other. So by convention, let's call these numbers as increments of ones, or the ones placed when it comes to mathematics. This convention would be very useful on the following parts of this video. If we have increments of 1, we also have increments of 10. If you would remember, SHIP is the Sino-Korean version of number 10. But for Sino-Korean numbers that are higher than 10, we also use SHIP to indicate an increment of 10. This is similar to the tens place of mathematics. Take, for example, number 12. The Sino-Korean version of number 12 is SHIP E. SHIP means 10 and E means 2. Take note that the principle is SHIP plus E. So 10 plus 2 is 12. This also applies to other numbers from 1 to 9. SHIP 1, SHIP 2, SHIP 3, SHIP 4, and so on. Another brief example that we can take is number 30. Take note that SHIP is on the second position. So it's like SAM, which is 3, times SHIP, which is 10. So 10 times 3 equals 30. This will also apply to the other numbers if it is positioned before SHIP. So there is also SHIP, 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 and so on. We'll have more examples on this later on this video. If we have increments of 1 and 10, we also have increments of 100 for Sino-Korean. And we call it BEK. BEK equals 100. And this can also be used as increments of 100 for numbers higher than 100, such as 200, 300, or 400. In mathematics, this is called the hundreds place. Take, for example, number 400. We know that SA is number 4 and BEK is 100. So SA times BEK, which means 4 times 100, is equal to 400. This also works to other numbers from 1 to 9. Another example would be 105. We know that BEK is 100 and O is 5. So it's like 100 plus 5 is 105. Again, we'll have more examples of this further in this video. If we have increments of 1, 10, and 100, we also have an increment of 1,000. If we are dealing with numbers equal or higher than 1,000, we'll be adding chon. In mathematics, this is equivalent to the thousands place. So far, the intention of this video is to introduce the increments that will be useful for counting numbers higher than 9. So the increments of 10 is called SHIP, increments of 100 is called BEK, increments of 1,000 is chon, increment of 10,000 is man. Now let us apply these increments into examples. For numbers 10 up to 99, we'll be using this formula. So we have the value equals multiplier times increment of 10 plus the increment of 1. As mentioned, this is only used for values 10 up to 99. Take note that this doesn't involve an increment of 100 since the last number is 99. For this case, we'll only need the increment of 10, which is SHIP. So on this formula, we are basically dividing the number into two parts. The first part is the tens place, and the second part is the ones place, just like how we do it in math. Take, for example, number 29. We know that this is composed of 20 and 9. 2 is the tens place and 9 is the ones place. We know that 20 can be formed by multiplying 10 by 2. So, the first part, which is 2 times 10 or the tens place, is actually translated into Sino-Korean as E-sheep. Why is it E-sheep? The Korean translation of 2 in Sino-Korean numbers is E. And the Korean translation of number 10 or increment of 10 in Sino-Korean is sheep. So when we say E-sheep, it's the same as saying 2 sets of 10. And then the second part is very simple. We already know and we already memorized number 1 to 9 of Sino-Korean numbers. So the Sino-Korean version of number 9 is just gu. And then we'll just add it to the first part, which is E-sheep. If you could check, we are able to follow the formula. So for you to transform a number into its Sino-Korean pronunciation or spelling, you would need to follow the formula. Now that we were able to explain how to count from 10 to 99, let's proceed with the values 100 up to 999. So aside from increments of 1 and increments of 10, numbers from 100 up to 999 also involves increments of 100. And therefore, we'll be using baek. So the formula that we should follow is this. Value equals multiplier times increment of 100 plus multiplier times increment of 10 plus the increment of 1. Take note that for this given formula and for the previous formula given, multiplier is just equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 9, or the increments of 1. As compared to the previous formula, the only difference is that we added the cluster that has the formula for the increment of 100. So let's try to apply this formula by looking into this example. So the value is 567. And so this could be divided into 3 parts. The part with increment of 100 or the 100 place, the part with the increments of 10 or the tens place, and the increment of 1. Let's start with the increment of 100. So 5 times 100 equals 500. So 5 is O and baek is 100. So when we say O baek, it's the same as saying 5 sets of 100. So again, 5 is O and 100 is baek or increment of 100. So when we say O baek, it's the same as saying 500 or 5 sets of 100. So that's it for the increment of 100, which is the first part. Now let's proceed to the second part of this example, which is the increment of 10 or the tens place. So to make 60, we have to multiply 10 by 6. And 6 in Sino-Korean is yuk. And the increment of 10 is ship. So 60 or 6 times 10 is actually pronounced as yuk ship. So when we say yuk ship, it's the same as saying 6 sets of 10. And then the last part of this example is the increment of 1, which is number 7. And we already know that the Sino-Korean version of number 7 is chil. So if we combine 560 and 7, it will result to a Sino-Korean number which is read as obek yukship chil. So 567 is actually read as obek yukship chil. Now let's proceed with knowing how to write the Sino-Korean numbers for values 1000 up to 9,999. So if we will compare this formula with the previous formula, the only difference is that there is an additional element that shows how to indicate the thousands place. So there is a multiplier times increment of 100 portion on the first part. So let me state the whole formula first. The value is equal to multiplier times increment of 1000 plus multiplier times increment of 100 plus multiplier times increment of 10 plus increment of 1. Since the value is 1,000 up to 9,999, it does not only involve increments of 100, increments of 10, or increments of 1. Instead, it has 4 increments involved. Aside from increments of 100, 10, and 1, we'll be also using the increment of 1,000. And we know that that is ton. So aside from bek and ship, we'll be also using ton. So let's try to apply this formula with the given example. So the number is 8,234. So this number could be subdivided into 4 parts. The thousands place, which is 8 times 1,000. The hundreds place, which is 2 times 100. The tens place, which is 3 times 10. And the ones place. So let's explain first the thousands place, which is 8 times 1,000 or 8,000. So we know that the Sino-Korean version of 8 is ship. And the Sino-Korean term for an increment of 1,000 or 1,000 itself is chon. So when we say sip chon, it's the same as saying 8,000 or 8 sets of 1,000. So the ship part or number 8 is just a multiplier, so it can be changed into the other numbers from 1 to 9. So we can use il, I, samsa, and so on. The next part is the hundreds place, and we already applied this from the previous parts of this video. So, ibek is actually the same as saying 200 or 2 sets of 100. Number 2 is I in Sino-Korean, and 100 is bek in Sino-Korean. So, again, ibek is the same as 200. The third part is the tens place, and that is sam ship. Sam is number 3 and ship is number 10. So, when we say sam ship, it's the same as saying 30 or 3 sets of 10. And the last part would be the ones place, which is 4, which you already know as sa. So, 8,234 is actually pronounced in Sino-Korean as sipchon, ibek, samship, sa. Sipchon is the thousands place or the 8,000 part. Ibek is the hundreds place, which corresponds to 200. Samship is the tens place, which corresponds to 30. And sa is the ones place, which corresponds to 4. So, if we combine all this, we know that the pronunciation of 8,234 is sipchon, ibek, samship, sa. And with that, we already know how to count up to 9,999. Just a reminder, if the multiplier on the formula is 1, then there's no need to mention it anymore. For example, number 10. Although this could be described as one set of 10, some people would be tempted to call it il ship. So il is 1 and ship is 10. So that's one set of 10. But as mentioned, if the multiplier is just 1, then there's no need to mention it. So instead of il ship, we'll be saying ship. So it's the same as 100. It should be bek instead of il bek. And lastly, for 1,000, it should be chon, not il chon. But again, if the multiplier is not 1, then you'll need to mention that multiplier itself. More example. So if we have 12, it's ship I, not il ship I. Since the tens place is just multiplied to 1, we won't have to pronounce the il part anymore. So 12 is just ship I. Next is 102. This is just pronounced as bek I and not il bek I. Last example is 1,222. So this is pronounced as chon I bek I ship I and not il chon I bek I ship I. Again, if the multiplier is 1, there's no need to mention it. So right now, let's have a drill of Sino-Korean numbers 11 to 20. So we just have to follow the formula, ship plus any number from 1 to 9. So, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So let's have a run through of it right now. The Sino-Korean version of number 11 is ship il. Ship is 10 and il is 1. So 10 plus 1 is 11. So ship il is 11. The Sino-Korean translation of number 12 is ship e. So ship corresponds to the tens place of the number, and e corresponds to the ones place of the number. So the tens place is just 10, and the ones place value is just 2. So 10 plus 2 is 12. So 12 is ship e. The Sino-Korean translation of number 13 is ship sam. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10, and sam represents the ones place value, which is 3. So 10 plus 3 is 13, and that is ship sam. Next, the Sino-Korean translation of 14 is ship sa. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10, and sa represents the ones value, which is 4. So 10 plus 4 is 14, and that would be ship sa in Sino-Korean. So next, the Sino-Korean translation of number 15 is ship o. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10. O represents the ones value, which is 5. So 10 plus 5 is 15, and that would be ship o. Next is 16. The Sino-Korean translation of 16 is ship yuk. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10, and yuk represents the ones value, which is 6. So 10 plus 6 is 16, and that would be ship yuk in Sino-Korean. Next is 17. The Sino-Korean translation of this is ship chil. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10, and chil represents the ones value, which is 7. So 10 plus 7 is 17, and that would be ship chil in Sino-Korean. Next is number 18. The Sino-Korean translation of this is ship pal. Ship represents the tens value, which is 10, and pal represents the ones place value, which is 8. So 10 plus 8 is 18, and that would be ship pal in Sino-Korean. Next is number 19. The Sino-Korean translation of this is ship gu. Ship represents the tens place value, which is 10, and gu represents the ones place value, which is 9. So 10 plus 9 is 19, and that would be ship gu in Sino-Korean. Next is 20, and the Sino-Korean version of this is e ship. E means 2 and ship means 10. So it's the same as saying 2 sets of 10, and that is equal to 20. Now, let's also have a drill of Sino-Korean numbers by 10. So the following numbers actually follow the formula as stated. Any number from 1 to 9 plus the term ship. Let's go. Number 10. The Sino-Korean translation of this is simply ship. As mentioned, if the multiplier is just 1, then there's no need to mention it. So this can be described as one set of 10, but this should simply be pronounced as ship. Next is number 20. The Sino-Korean translation of this is e ship. E means 2 and ship is 10, so that would be the same as saying 2 sets of 10, and that is equal to 20. So e ship is the Sino-Korean version of 20. Next is 30. And the Sino-Korean translation of this is Sam ship. Sam means number 3 and ship means 10. So it's the same as saying 3 sets of 10. So that would be 30. Next is number 40. The Korean translation of this is sa ship. Sa means 4 and ship means 10. So it's the same as saying 4 sets of 10. And that is equal to 40. Therefore, the Sino-Korean translation of 40 is sa ship. Next is number 50. The Sino-Korean translation of this is o ship. O means number 5 and ship is the Korean translation for 10. So, it's the same as saying 5 sets of 10, and that is equal to 50. Next is number 60. The Sino-Korean translation of this is yuk ship. Yuk means number 6 and ship means number 10. So it's the same as saying 6 sets of 10. And that is equal to 60. Next is number 70. The Sino-Korean translation of this is chul sip. Chul means 7 and ship means 10. So, this combined would be the same as saying 7 sets of 10, and that is equal to 70. Next is 80. The Sino-Korean translation of this is pal ship. Pal means number 8 and ship means 10. So it's the same as saying 8 sets of 10, and that would be equal to 80. Next is 90. The Sino-Korean translation of this is gu ship. Gu means 9 and ship means 10. And this combined is the same as saying as 9 sets of 10. So 9 times 10 is equal to 90. And with all that long discussion, we were able to learn how to form numbers, specifically Sino-Korean numbers, higher than 10. Please check the same set of lessons for native Korean numbers. Thank you.